Hello again. One of the things which some people find irritating is the preoccupation with black ethnicity, black history, and the needs of black people to the exclusion of all other minority ethnicities. The measure of an organisation which is successful today in combating systemic racism lies in the percentage of black staff which it employs, rather than the number of people of Chinese ancestry, Jews, or those whose families are from the Indian subcontinent. In the same way, for a month in October, we hear only about black people who have lived in or been in some way connected with Britain. Nothing about any other group, such as Indians, say. This is curious because all the efforts to prove that Britain is, and has in the past been, an institutionally racist country centre around the supposed disadvantages faced by black people alone. Only they have, it seemed, had to struggle against racism and discrimination, and it is to make amends for their suffering that efforts must be made to ensure that they now have access to various professions and universities from which they have in the past been allegedly excluded. Something about this doesn't add up because when you look beyond the experience of people of African or Caribbean ancestry, one finds that Britain's always been a very welcoming society without much in the way of racial prejudice. Let me give two examples to show what I mean. We are often told that until the 1980s there had never been a black MP in this country. In the same way, there is at the moment a huge drive in what is known as widening access to try and get more black people to qualify as doctors and lawyers. The implicit assumption is that racial prejudice has in the past prevented black people from becoming members of parliament, barristers and surgeons. Let's look at how much racial prejudice there was in this country more than 100 years ago, during the reign of Queen Victoria. The thumbnail to this video shows Dadabai Naraji, of whom I doubt any viewers have ever heard. They've all heard, of course, of Diane Abbott, one of the first black MPs who had to overcome all that racism to get into Parliament. But you see, Naraji was elected as an MP in this country all the way back in 1892. Nobody ever talks about him, though, because he spoils the narrative of all that racism which was supposed to be about in this country in those days. He didn't want to take the oath in Parliament when he was elected on the Bible, and used instead the holy book of the Zoroastrian religion. Nobody batted an eyelid at this. It wasn't relevant. There is nothing in the newspapers at the time which suggests that anybody cared in the slightest that he was Indian. They cared only for his politics. There are reports of him opening school fetes and attending various functions. There's no mention that anybody bothered in the least that he was an Indian. What they were bothered about was whether he was going to be a good MP or not. Let me give another example. In 1919, a barrister who was a King's Counsel was appointed as a government minister in this country, and in the same year given a peerage to sit in the House of Lords. Anybody heard of him? An Indian in the House of Lords who was also in the government as a minister? Of course not. Has anybody heard of the Indian medical students in this country who qualified as doctors? There were women among them. What about the fact that Gandhi qualified as a barrister in London in 1891? There were many Indians in London studying to be lawyers and doctors at that time. What is interesting is, of course, that none of those people in Victorian England needed programmes of widening access or required special treatment to get into medical schools or Parliament or to study law. It was all done purely on merit, and nobody seemed much bothered about the colour of their skins. There is something very odd about this idea that black people have faced such awful prejudice and it has prevented them from getting on and becoming doctors, lawyers and MPs. How is it that the institutional prejudice, which did not seem to have been about in 19th century Britain and that still does not prevent Indians from qualifying to get into medical school and so on without special help? How is it that that institutional prejudice doesn't affect those people? I shall be talking more about this in coming days. As usual, I give links in the description to this video to back up what I've been saying.